nothing is quite like reading the Torah for yourself. Essayist, what you just experienced in saying, wait a minute, there's this. Because I was going to go with, well, that's just him getting the robe of glory. I wasn't focusing on those clothes that were left, But it talks about him changing clothes, So I think that it adds attention to it. Whereas with his brothers, just rip the robe. It doesn't talk about what he got next, until he gets to the servant's house. So it's things like that where once you understand that the author is writing this way, you will start paying attention and tease things out and say, is he going somewhere with this? Like, could this be something? It's like you're fishing, you're hunting and you're digging, you're looking for treasure. So get the fundamentals down is what we're doing in this class. We're just learning how to read the way he wants us to read. That's all we're doing. And then you start discovering things for yourself. And it's a blast, I'm in the process of writing out what I shared with you guys about the test of adultery, being from Genesis 3 and Exodus 32, going into Numbers 5. And that's really exciting, and we're going to talk about the test of adultery again today because I think it's everywhere. See, what you'll find, if I haven't said it, I'm sure, ritual and law explain narrative. Narrative flesh out ritual. Like the Numbers ritual of test of adultery. That explains the narrative of Genesis 3, the narrative of Numbers 5. And we'll find out the narrative of Exodus 15. So these rituals and laws that seem really strange explain the narrative. So they're working together. They're not working separate. Genealogies support the narratives. All of these things are different types of writing, but they like work together, in a beautiful relationship. So, okay, let's jump into Exodus. Exodus begins with the word "and," which means that it's connected to Genesis, okay? So the story is continuing, all right? And what we have in Exodus 1, and now guys, listen, I'm just gonna give you a heads up. We are gonna move much faster through Exodus, even faster through Leviticus and Numbers, and then fastest through Deuteronomy, okay? But Genesis was important because it shows you how to read the Bible, specifically the Torah. And then we'll pick up and run when we get to Exodus, kind of like we did the end of Genesis. Okay, so just a couple things to point out. Exodus 1, it starts out with a new world order. It tells you about 70 people that went to Egypt. And so remember, that's from the 70, the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. So you've got Israelites in Egypt, and they're multiplying like absolute crazy. This is Genesis 12 being fulfilled. They are multiplying. The seed, like Jacob's body, Sarah's body, are planted like seeds in Canaan, and they are now sprouting big time, okay? Now, what should Pharaoh have done? Okay, what do we see the old Pharaoh do to Joseph? Yeah, hey, whatever you want to do, Joseph, I'm game. I see the Spirit of God on you. Like, I'm all about it. It's what Abimelech did with Isaac. Hey, I see your blessing. Can we make covenant? It's what they did with Abraham, okay? Pharaoh should have been, what did John the Baptist do? What did Jonathan do with David? Jonathan was heir to the throne, was he not? And he was a good guy. Jonathan's one of the best guys in the whole Bible. He's incredible. I think he's like in the top 5, I would put, in the whole Bible. Jonathan is next level awesome in every imaginable way. I don't know that there's one time I can think of where I wasn't pleased with Jonathan in reading the Bible. Not once. Okay? But what did he do with David? He gives him his armor. And we know in that day that armor wasn't plentiful, that only Saul and Jonathan had the best stuff. So what did John the Baptist do when Jesus came? I must decrease and he must increase. Pharaoh, in seeing God's blessing on Israel, should have said, okay, what do I do? What does Psalm 2 tell all the kings in the world? Kiss the Son, lest he get angry with you. Do you see what anger looks like in Exodus 7-12? He gets destroyed, right? So what should Pharaoh have done? He should have done what the first Pharaoh did. But because he doesn't have faith, he sees blessing and is afraid of it. Okay? And so he starts subtle. He starts by making life hard on them. Then he ups the ante by having the midwives kill the babies in secret. They don't listen, so it goes to outright, all right, throw them in the Nile, everybody. So it starts subtle, it gets more severe, and then it gets outright totally severe. And guys, we'll find that that's exactly what God does in the plagues. It starts subtle. Remember, the Nile turns to blood. That's a big deal. But then it says, but they could dig along the side and get water. Okay? But it starts getting more severe, more severe, more severe. And what is this? It's exactly how God does justice. What did you just do to me, to my firstborn son? Okay, I'll do it to you, but I'm going to do it in the same way you did it to me. I'm going to start subtle, and I'm going to get more severe till I take your firstborn son. It's exactly what it does. I was just reading this morning in Deuteronomy. It says, if there's a false witness in the courtroom, and someone's trying to lie about this guy to get him in trouble, and God says, you find that out, the guy that was lying to get this guy in trouble, whatever punishment that guy would have gotten, the liar gets. That's perfect justice. Do you see that? So when God says to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God, he's teaching you how to do justice. Guys, I know justice screwed up because I've done it. I've done it to my kids. I've overdone justice and I've underdone justice. I've done both. And then I've done justice right with my kids. It's really easy to overdo and have it turn into vengeance. Or it's really easy to not do enough and be a weakling and a coward. It's really hard to do it just right. It takes God. It takes supernatural ability to do justice just right. But God's been showing you what it looks like. It's my friend putting the bike in the bed. That was perfect. It helped his son see what he did. And that's what discipline is. Discipline is showing, like what happened to the brothers, showing them what they did again and seeing if it's handled differently this time, So this is what's happening. So it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until he's having all of Egypt kill these baby boys. Okay? And that's important because you could say, well, doesn't it seem a little rough that God did this to Egypt when it was really only Pharaoh? Well, did anybody stop Pharaoh when he told them all to kill babies? No. So were they complicit in that? Absolutely. Pharaoh didn't get dethroned when he said throw all the baby boys in the Nile. And so Egypt is also complicit in what took place here. And of course, we see the very same thing recycle with Herod and Jesus, right? He starts out subtle. He just says to the Magi, he says, hey, I'd like to worship him too. Will you tell me where he's at? They lie to him and go the other way. And so then it turns not subtle. And he says, all right, kill all the baby boys under 3. So that's the idea there, okay? All right, so chapter 2, we get into Moses as the forerunner. And what this means is that Moses, and you'll find this, just like Abraham had his exodus, where was Abraham's exodus out of? Abraham, when he went down into Egypt, God gave him an exodus from that Pharaoh, Remember? That was like a little preview of what this Exodus would look like. He goes down because there's a famine. Pharaoh takes in Sarah, imprisons Sarah, so to speak. God vindicates it with plagues. He gives Abram plunder, and then he goes out of Egypt with much plunder. See how that was a mini Exodus? Okay, and then Jacob has a mini Exodus. Where's Jacob's mini Exodus? With Laban. Laban, right? He is forced to go to Laban, like they're forced in the famine. Laban imprisons him. God vindicates Jacob out of Laban's house and stops Laban from doing anything to him. And Jacob leaves with much plunder. Do you see this like recycling Exodus motif going on? And then now Moses. So the point is forerunners, the person who leads the pack needs to experience what the pack is about to experience before they do. That's what a forerunner is, right? And Moses experiences the Exodus just like Abraham and Jacob. How does Moses experience an Exodus? Well, he has a death sentence, right? He's a little boy, he's supposed to be killed. So he's put in the water, all right? So that's like his death sentence. That's where he's supposed to die, but he's floating because his mom made a basket. And he's pulled out of the water, just like Israel will be pulled out of the Red Sea. And he's delivered from Pharaoh through his daughter, okay? And so Moses experiences a very similar Exodus. Then after he's drawn out of the water, he'll eventually go to Sinai and experience the burning bush. Israel will be drawn out of the water and go to Sinai and experience the fire on top of Mount Sinai. So Moses experiences the exact same process. Drawn out of the water, saved from Pharaoh's house, goes into the wilderness. His wilderness is Midian, and then he goes up to Sinai as a shepherd. Israel, drawn out of the Red Sea, walks through the wilderness, gets to Sinai where there's a fire. So it's all of this movement. Now, Moses experiences a first Exodus, just like Israel will experience an Exodus. And Israel will also respond to the Exodus the way Moses responds to his Exodus. Okay? Which brings us to the fact that he is a reluctant prophet. Yeah, I already went over the irony. So he's a reluctant prophet. Now, so he goes into Midian. He's there for 40 years. What does 40 make you think of? New creation. Okay? He's in there 40 years. He's in 40 years in Egypt. Then he's 40 years in Midian. And then he'll end up being 40 years in the wilderness. I like the way James Boyce puts it. He said, God taught Moses for 40 years how to be something in Egypt. He taught Moses 40 years in Midian how to be nothing. And he taught Moses 40 years in the wilderness how to rely on God for everything. So Egypt sort of built him up, and what we find is that he had the right heart, but he didn't do well in how he handled it. What do I mean by that? Okay, so before he's a reluctant prophet, what makes Moses leave Egypt? What's that? He killed an Egyptian. Yeah. Yeah, Solomon, would you turn to Acts 7 for us? So he killed an Egyptian. It was known by Pharaoh. Okay, so let me ask you guys. Should Moses have killed the Egyptian? Has that been a conversation? No? Okay. I like how you guys bring me into all your arguments. It's kind of funny. Okay. Should Moses have killed the Egyptian? Was that a noble thing? Okay. Who says he should have killed the Egyptian? Shaq, you think he should have? It was beating a slave? Okay. Who thinks he shouldn't have killed the Egyptian? Who's really nervous to raise their hand? All right. Solomon, read for us 22 to 29. This is Stephen's speech, Acts 7, 22 to 29. This is Stephen's speech talking about Moses and what he did. Okay. So what does Stephen think about what happened? So you think Stephen thinks he should have killed him? Yes. Okay. So what do I think Stephen's doing here? Because, guys, I take the view that Moses shouldn't have killed the Egyptian. All right. Now, why do I take that view? I take the view because of how it reads in the text. It says, exactly. It says that Moses looked this way and that and killed the Egyptian and then buried him. Okay? Okay. That doesn't strike me as a positive victory. Okay? This is kind of where I put in the same camp as I put Abraham and Isaac lying or having their wives lie. Okay? I'm not crazy about this. So the question is how did Stephen read it? Well, here's what I think Stephen meant, and he might correct me when I get to heaven, but I think what Stephen meant was God was at work in Moses, and he was at work in Moses because he says that he came out and looked at his kin. So Moses grew up in Pharaoh's household, which had lots of luxury, but he still chose, Hebrews says, to be associated with the people of Christ than with Pharaoh. So that was faith. That was really good of Moses. So I think what Moses was up to was a good thing, but I think it was a naive thing. I think it was a little bit like what Joseph did in telling his brothers the dreams. I think it was like what Abraham and Isaac did in deceiving. I think he did this thing in his own strength, is what I think. And as a result of that, he went into the wilderness and God discipled him there. But I think what Stephen's getting at is that Israel should have been in this situation like Jacob was when Joseph was telling his dreams. Was Jacob different than the brothers? No, I'm saying Jacob. Was Jacob, when Joseph tells his dreams, do you guys think that that's a good thing Joseph's doing, or like kind of like, oh, Joseph, that's kind of embarrassing? Yeah. I know very few people that think Joseph wasn't a little bit naive in that situation, okay? All right. The brothers want to kill him because of it. What does Jacob do when he hears it? Huh? He does rebuke him, but then it says something after that. Yes. He ponders it in his heart, okay? And I think what Israel should have done with Moses in this moment is, I don't think he should have killed the Egyptian the way he did. But I think the Israelites should have looked past that to say that God is doing something. He's not perfect, but God's doing something. He grew up in Pharaoh's house and he's with us. That's incredible. That's a God thing. Who would want to associate with the slave people when you could have everything in Pharaoh's home? Right? So I think they should have been like Jacob, even though there was a rebuke necessary. They should have been like Jacob and said, no, there's something going on here. Let's watch this play out. And said, Moses, hey, you're right. We shouldn't do this. And by the way, you shouldn't have killed the Egyptian. That's what I think should have happened. So I think Stephen's condemnation of Israel is right. Because I think where he's headed is, just like you did this with Moses, you're now doing it with Jesus. And he doesn't go there, but whereas Moses had sin, Jesus has none. And I think that's the argument Stephen is mounting, that you have a track record of not being able to see. You see with the eyes of Isaac. You see with the eyes that are dim, and you don't have a pulse on what God's up to. Yeah, that's my read. I could be wrong, and Stephen could totally make Moses out to do the right thing. I just think the narrative doesn't read that way, in my opinion. Totally. And Israel, that's the type of stuff that should have been said when someone rebuked Moses. Someone like you should have turned to that guy and said, hey, time out. He left, someone should have defended Moses, and nobody did. And that's why he split. So what you just said is exactly what I'm thinking Israel should have said. Yes, but let's look at the good in this. Yeah. So I think that's the deal. So, but he leaves. He goes to Midian. He meets his wife at a well. And then we have the burning bush, okay? So he gets to the burning bush. And, this is like the fire at Eden with the cherubim and the holy ground. This will be like the fire atop Sinai. What's notable about the fire? It's a fire with no fuel. So God, yeah. Uh-huh. I think so. Yeah, it's, all things unite in Christ. And so I think, and all of these little glimpses are in some way connected to him, in some way. So yeah, I think that's a very valid insight.
It's not mine.
Josh. Yeah. And guys, there was something what was it? I just had it. Something important to just catch by way of narrative, that all through Genesis 1 and 2, the only time God's name is mentioned is in reference to the midwives. So the way that you're meant to read Genesis 1 and 2 is like, man, there's incredible things happening, but God feels a little distant. You should feel that way. There's just times when you're reading the Bible, you should feel a certain way, like Esther. God's name isn't mentioned once. Where are they at? They're in exile. So what should you feel? Distant from God. Do you see? Oh, sorry, thanks. In Exodus 1 and 2. Yeah. It's mentioned with the midwives, and then at the very end of chapter 2. Okay? Now, another thing I already pointed out from earlier, but this is the seed of the woman versus the seed of the serpent. Pharaoh is trying to get rid of the seed of the woman, and he has all the boys killed, right? And then we find the seed of the woman rise up, and who is it that saves Moses? Jochebed, his mother, Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter, his sister, Pharaoh's daughter, and her maids. So at least five women are the ones that save Moses. So that is the seed of the woman being in enmity with the seed of the serpent. She is overcoming. It's like JL. They're overcoming. The women are overcoming. And it's also kind of humorous, because who does Pharaoh think's the problem? The men. And he's like, it's the woman that beat you, buddy. So it's just ironic. Okay. So anyway, so we're into the burning bush, and the burning bush, as I said, it's a good symbol of God because it is self-sufficient. Moses notices that it's not burning the bush; it's just a fire that has no fuel, which means, like God, it's self-sufficient. Fire isn't something you form or can manipulate or control easily, which is like God. He is the one that does the forming. Fire is a fearful thing. Tim Keller says that's something you say to your kids. Hey kids, don't play with fire. And that's what it's like with God. A fearful thing. Israel, you look like you got something to say. Okay. And so these are all just things to consider. You've got up until this point God being associated with fire through the cherubim's flaming sword, the smoking fire pot, the flaming torch, and he'll continue to be associated with fire atop Sinai, and then the pillar of cloud and fire. So God is a consuming fire. He's a consuming fire, and that'll get transferred to the altar, the bronze altar, which has a fire burning all the time. Okay? All right. So this is really interesting. God calls Moses, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. Do you know the only clothing object that priests aren't described in the priest garments? He covers their head, talks about chest area, talks about a sash, it's a robe. What haven't I talked about? Feet. That the priests were probably barefoot. It's the only clothing item not talked about. So, why? Because they're on holy ground. Dust is death anywhere else. But where God is, it's holy. Take your shoes off because they got dust on them. They got death on them. You're on holy ground. So, this starts here with Moses taking his feet off. Or taking his sandals off. Okay, so God starts talking to Moses. And Moses, is he all about it or is he reluctant? Very reluctant. 5 times reluctant. 5 times. Now, what you'll begin seeing, guys, is when you get into the narrative of Israel, you start getting really mad at Israel because they are so obstinate. Okay? Not that we can't relate. Okay, but they're very obstinate to the point you're like, what's wrong with these people? All right, well, guess who else is obstinate? Their forerunner. Remember, just like he experiences the victory that they're going to experience before they do, so he experiences the disobedience that they will exhibit. So Moses is obstinate. Moses gets saved, his people will get saved. Moses is obstinate, his people are obstinate. He has 5 objections. In Numbers 14, when God drops the hammer finally on Israel and says, I'm done, you're spending 40 years in the wilderness. He goes, because you have refused to believe me, these, and he gives a number. Do you remember what number he gives? 10. So check that out. Moses has 5 objections. Israel's kept out of the promised land for 10 disobediences. Double time Moses. Why? Guys, so, and this works as a really good argument, I would say, for double imputation in that sense, right? Because think about it. Moses' sin gets essentially purported in the people, blown up in the people. His 5 goes to 10 in them. And it works just the opposite way with Christ. That his righteousness gets put in us because he's our forerunner. Okay? So I think it's an important thing to catch. Just as Moses gets saved, Israel will be saved. But just as Moses is disobedient, Israel will be disobedient. Okay? Now, God answers every one of his 5 questions. Moses says, who am I? God says, I'll be with you. Don't worry about that. Remember, what's most important is what God says about us, not what we think about ourselves. Right? So, who am I? I'll be with you. Don't worry about that. What should I tell them your name is? God answers, I am who I am. Total self-existence. And he adds further that he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that brings up all the stories with them. But then he goes on. This is the 3rd question. They won't believe me, or objection. They won't believe me. God gives him 3 signs. So think about the beauty of that. 3rd question, I'll give you three signs. Do you see that? Do you see the justice of God there? This is your third objection. I'll give you 3 signs. Okay? This is how he works. Now, what has been called a sign up to this point? There's 2 things that have been called a sign in the book of Genesis. Circumcision's one. The rainbow. Very good, guys. Okay, so each sign that God gives is infused with significance. The circumcision has to do with stop relying on your body parts. Okay? The rainbow stands for you will have peace with God because now the bow is pointed in a different direction. I will die. I'm planning to die, Exodus 15. So these signs have significance to them. So when you read that God gives Moses 3 signs, you shouldn't just say these are magic tricks. Hey, I got a box of cards here. Let me choose your card, any card, you know. It's not just a magic trick. These mean something. They have theological import because the other 2 signs do. Remember, Genesis equips you how to read the rest of the Bible. So it prepares you for what's next. It always does that. That's what I'm saying. If you were in a culture that only had the Bible and you read it the way God wanted you to and meditated on it day and night, you would start picking these things up, and then you'd write them down for the next generation. And then they'd pick up more things. And then they'd write it down for the next generation, and they'd pick up more things. Like, that's how this stuff works. And there's enough to go, like, for eternity. So when we have these 3 signs, what do we say? Okay. Well, the first one is a staff. Okay. What is a staff? The staffs were very much associated with the person. Remember, we've been prepared for that. Whose staff do we find is basically his wallet? Judah. So when you've got your staff, man, it's like who you are. Okay? I mean, we can maybe look at it as like your shoes or something. Like you see somebody's shoes, oh, that's Asai's shoes. Like it's associated with you, right? So a staff is associated with you. And what is a staff? A staff is a dead piece of wood. How old is Moses? He's 80 years old. He's like Abraham's age. Well, how did Abraham view himself? As good as dead. So, the staff is like Moses's, okay? The staff is like Moses, I should say. And he throws it down, and it turns into a serpent, which will swallow up the serpent. Do you see how that's going back to Genesis 3? The serpent's head will get crushed. The serpent will die. Moses, as good as dead, will beat the serpent. That's the play going on there, okay? But what else does it tell you when Moses does that? It's pretty humorous. It's kind of like what we talked about Moses chasing off the birds, or Abraham chasing off the birds. What does Moses do when he throws his staff down? It says he ran away. So, I think what that also probably has told you for is to say that will Moses be perfect throughout the whole thing, or will he have some doubt and some fear? I think he's going to have some fear, which is why he runs away from the snake. But anyway, so then we keep going, and the second sign is what? His hand, okay? So he puts his hand in, takes it out, and it's what? Okay. All right. And so we'll get into this when we get into Leviticus today, but leprosy, what does it say when Miriam becomes leprous? What does it say that she looked like? It says that she looked like a stillborn infant. So she looked like a baby that was dead. Okay? Like just pale and white. What that means is leprosy, or whatever this skin disease is. I don't think it's actually leprosy. It's a skin disease. You'll see that as you look at different features of it. But it's just the way they translate it. But anyway, it's a skin disease, okay? But what we do know about it is that when you have it, you look like you're dead. You look like dead flesh. So I think what's taking place here is that God is saying to Moses, you guys are like you are dead, like the staff, dead wood. You're dead. You're buried, and I'm going to give you life. Okay, I'm gonna make you healthy again. So that's the idea. But it works the opposite with Egypt, right? Because you're alive right now, but when God's done with you, you will look like you're dead, which is exactly what the land looks like, and the firstborn sons, which represented their future. Okay? Firstborn sons, your future. So Israel will go from dead, from the grave, to life. Egypt will go from life to the grave, and they'll be buried in the end. So these signs have much significance. And then the third sign is turning water to blood, and that ends up being the first plague. And that is also filled with significance because what did Pharaoh turn the Nile into by throwing all the baby boys into it? He turned it into a river of death. And so God just makes the Nile look like what it looks like to him. I looked down on this thing. It was a thing of life for you and blessing, but you've made it a thing of death. So it will become a thing of death. And he turns it to blood. It just looks like what it is. So it's God's justice, okay? And then he asks God of his objections. The guiding question that I told you guys yesterday is introduced. The guiding question of the book of Exodus is, who are you? What is your name? Because it tells you that Israel's groaning and crying out. And do they actually say, and God, let's see, look at in verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. So they don't actually say God's name. Do you see that? So the rest of Exodus is a book about teaching God's name to his children. They don't mention it when they cry out to him. Moses asks, if they ask me your name, what should I tell them? We'll find in just a second, Pharaoh's going to say, who is the Lord? So the book of Exodus is about answering the name of God. Okay? That's the deal. And about getting Joseph's dead body out of Egypt into the land of promise. And when I say Joseph's dead body, I mean Israel too. Okay. So the journey begins. Okay? And as it begins, Moses goes to Jethro to tell him to leave. But Moses is still a bit of a reluctant prophet. He does not give Jethro a good reason to go. Like he just, what does he say? Verse 18, Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Go back to Egypt. Is that a good thing Moses says there? God just said, hey, go rescue my people. Moses goes to Jethro and goes, hey, I got to go check to see if these people are even still alive. Like, you're like, it's kind of like Jacob leaving Laban. It's like, that could have been done better, you know? All right, so, but he continues because he's a little half-hearted here still. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to point out, with the 5 objections, I didn't finish the 5 objections. I went off into the 3 signs. Let me finish those real quick. Moses, number 4, Moses says, I'm not eloquent. God says, I made your mouth. I'll be with you again. And then last one, Moses says, please send someone else. God gets angry and says, Aaron's on his way. Okay? Now, be careful what you wish for. What did Aaron do? Golden calf. Hezekiah, God, you know that I've walked with you all my life. I've done so many good things for the kingdom of Israel. I'm sick. I'm going to die. Please give me 15, or please let me live longer. That's all he wants, right? What does God do? He gives him 15 more years. Hezekiah's thrilled. He's so happy. You know, he's living. He's gonna enjoy life a little bit longer. The Babylonians say, hey, we're so glad you're doing better. Can we come for a visit? He says, absolutely. They say, man, this is looking really good. He's like, you think this is good? Come see our treasury. Man, life is good right now, guys. Shows him his treasury. Prophet comes. He says, the Babylonians were here? Yeah. What did you show them? I showed them everything. In fact, there was nothing I did not show them. And I think it's Isaiah. He's like, all of that's going to get taken now. You were foolish, right? So be careful what you wish for. If it's your time to die, none of us want to live a second longer. Okay? Moses says, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. Aaron's on his way. And you'll live to regret that. And Aaron's the guy that makes the golden calf. So, guys, be careful. Be careful when we question God's plan. Okay, so Moses starts heading to Egypt, and God almost kills him. That's kind of interesting. He's obeying the Lord, and the angel of the Lord, I think it's the angel of the Lord, I don't think it's just an angel, goes to kill him. And amazingly, Zipporah, is it Zipporah? Yeah, she circumcises their son and throws the foreskin on Moses' leg. And the angel stops. So Moses is sitting there just getting pummeled by the angel. And Zipporah circumcises her son, throws the foreskin on Moses. Angel stops. What do you think that's all about? Yeah, a lot of people question exactly what happened here, just so you know. This is the way I think it happened. And then she calls him a bridegroom of blood. So here's what I think is happening. First of all, it gives us a picture of the Exodus because as a result of blood on something, the angel relents. Does that sound familiar? Passover, blood on the door, the death angel doesn't kill you. Your firstborn, right? So there's that. But I think there's more than that. I think that this is another forerunner discussion. Moses hasn't even circumcised his own kids. And now he's going to lead the circumcised people. Like, he's not even obedient in the sign of the covenant. Circumcision. He's not even obedient in that. How is he going to lead these people? And he's about to enter the land. And so I think this is also like the cherubim on the cusp of Eden. He's about to re-enter, and the cherubim's like, you're not fit to re-enter. You've still got flesh on you, in that it's on your son. And so he's about to kill him. Because you can't mess around with re-entering Eden. You got to be made new. You got to have the flesh off. Either cut off or taken out of your heart, like it was with Joseph's brothers. Okay? All right. We go to Exodus 5. And so, and before we jump into Exodus 5, how is Moses received by Israel? Good or bad? Look at, how was that? Good, yeah. They're thrilled. They're really happy about this. What's that? They worship. Yeah, they bow their heads and worshiped. So far, so good. But you know who they're like right now? They're like Adam, freshly made, before he named the animals. Because as soon as Moses goes to Pharaoh and say, hey, let my people go, how does that go? Terrible. Who is the Lord? That's our second question. God's going to answer it with the plagues in the Exodus. But then what does he do to them? Increases their burden, their pain, their work, okay? Now, how is that like what God does with Adam? Israel is his newborn child, guys. Israel is like, in a sense, in the womb right now, because we're going to talk about when the blood gets put over the door, okay? Let me ask you a question. You have a narrow opening that's bloody that children walk out of. Does that sound familiar? It sounded a lot more familiar if you had 6 kids. So you've got a narrow opening that's bloody out of which children come. So this is new birth imagery that's being employed in the Exodus. And then they go through a narrow channel of water, which is also birth imagery, right? Water breaks in a woman, their baby passes through a bloody narrow opening. That's all birth imagery, okay? All right. So this is their newborn child. This is an Adam. This is a new person, okay? And they get news of their liberation, and just like Adam gets introduced to partnership, but then he doesn't find partnership for himself. They get introduced to freedom, but then they get anything but freedom. And this is preparing them for the Exodus. Guys, listen. So, I remember last time I was here, there was a huge need at the church for childcare. Okay? It sounds like there's still kind of a need here now from Josh's message Sunday. But that was a big deal. That's why Jordan and Lauren were here, right? Getting that started. But what made you know that you needed that? Was that a pleasurable process or an unpleasurable process? I'm guessing kids were making a bunch of racket, and I'm guessing it was unpleasurable. That was like, hey, we need to have a kids ministry going on here. And so that's the way God works. So when you start having pain, don't expect it to go away immediately. It has to serve its work. And God is preparing, this is his method of preparing people for the Exodus, okay? This is the idea. All right, Exodus 6, God introduces his name to Moses, and he says that Yahweh was not a name that the patriarchs knew, okay? Now, is Yahweh ever used? By the way, Yahweh, Elohim gets introduced when God makes humanity. So Elohim is all through Genesis 1, the all-powerful, all-sufficient God. But then the Lord gets introduced when he makes man. So that is like this affectionate term that's rich with humanity, okay? Now here's my question. Did Yahweh ever get used with the patriarchs? God says they didn't know me by that name. Did Yahweh ever get used with them? It did. So what is God saying? I think what God's saying is they haven't known the fullness of that name yet, like you will. Do we see anything like the measure and scope of the plagues in the book of Genesis? No, you get little tastes of it here and there. Pharaoh's household gets plagues. Abimelech, you're a dead man if you sleep with Sarah. stuff like that. But nothing quite of the scope of like we see in the plagues. So I think that's what God means when he says that. And then he has them all get circumcised. Or their uncircumcised lips. That's what he says. They'll get circumcised before they go in the promised land, which is interesting. Like Moses. But Moses refers to his uncircumcised lips, and I think what that is there for is to demonstrate what really the problem is they need new hearts. So he takes a census, just like they'll take a census in Numbers before they enter the land, they take a census here before they leave the land. Okay, then we enter into the plagues. Now, this is where we're going to look big picture, so I tried to prepare this. I hope you guys can see it. Okay? And I want you to tell me any insights you have into the thing. This, as obviously at the top, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, tells you what it is. Then over here in this column, it gives you what to watch for in that plague. Okay? And I want you guys to just look at it, observe it, digest it, and see if there's anything you notice about it. Any certain things you notice. Any patterns, rhythms, anything like that. Okay, what did you guys notice? Anything? Okay, let's start with the top. Is the severity the same throughout, or does the severity start big and go small, or start small and go big? It decreases? Increases. Okay, so yeah, you've got movement and severity. Okay, so it starts in the water. Is that next to people? Is that right next to people or a little bit away from people? It's away from people. It's not in our environment. We don't live on the water. We live on the land. So it starts separate, okay, with the blood. How severe? Well, they can dig alongside the Nile and get water that way. So it's very unfortunate, but it's not like you're all going to die, okay? All right, then is there movement from the Nile to the frogs? Yes. Where do the frogs come from? They come out of the water onto the land. So this is God's judgment getting closer. So this is the way that you should picture it, okay? So, Doggy, stand up in the back of class there. Yeah, just right there. That's good. All right, so I'm the plagues, okay? So I'm starting in the water. There you go. And that's what Pharaoh looked like. There you go, Doggy. I'm starting in the water, and I'm coming up out of the water, and I'm coming to Doggy, and I'm about to get his throat and pound him against the wall. I pound him, yeah. Finish it. All right, thanks, Doggy. So that is what's happening. So it starts in the water, it comes on the land, and the frogs make it into Pharaoh's house. But is that severe? It's in kneading bowls and stuff like that. Is that severe? It's unfortunate. Is anybody going to die? The big thing is that this really stinks, because when God lifts the plagues, there's a stench of all the dead frogs, okay? So it's bad, but it's not awful. It's bad though, okay? All right, movement from severity. Is there any movement with the gnats or severity? Okay? All right, yes. So in the gnats, you've got dust from the ground. So the frogs came out of the water, they're on the ground. Now with the gnats, it's the plague is leaving the ground and coming to the air. So you got ground, you throw it in the air. And it says that all the dust on the ground turned into gnats. So, guys, frogs are one thing, gnats are another, correct? Like gnats, it's growing in severity. Okay, is what you see. All right, and then is there any movement or severity with the flies? Well, there's movement now. They didn't come from the land. Now it's fully in the air, okay? So there is this movement that God is plaguing you from water to land to air. So each of the three spheres are covered. Each of the three layers of earth are affected, okay? In one sense, and we'll get to another one in a second. But, all right, and the land, it says, is ruined. Gnats were annoying. This ruined the land, so it's bad. All right, and then it goes to the livestock. This is the first time. Did anybody die from the previous plagues? Nobody died. Now something dies. It's not humans yet, but it's livestock. So now we have death introduced. Death has not been introduced so far. Great inconvenience, horrendous inconvenience, but not death. Now we have death. Okay, then you move to, in severity, to the human body. Now you have boils, okay? Before it was like this, ugh, get out of here, frogs, throw them, ugh, ugh. Now you can't get it off you. It says that the magicians couldn't even show up. It's kind of laughable because they're like, and so they can't do it. So now the human body's affected, but did anybody die? No, nobody died yet. It just hurt. A lot worse than frogs, flies, and gnats. Okay? Now you get hail. Hail can kill. Boils didn't kill. Hail, if you're outside, but you have the option, you're not absolutely going to die. If you fear God, you won't die. You go inside, you won't die. But if you don't fear God and you're outside, and it seems like from the way you read it, people were outside, probably slaves, forced to be outside, they died. So this is the first time human death is introduced. Okay, so you see that it's growing in severity. Okay, now in number 7, in number 7 it introduces that phrase, all my plagues now are on your heart. Like that it's ramping up, and that's when human life threatened is introduced. Okay, now human life continues to get threatened through all of the land getting destroyed, the vegetation. And the reason this is big is because the hail destroyed a lot of its vegetation. But it says the wheat hadn't come up yet. So barley and flax, I think, were totally destroyed because they were in blossom, but the wheat hadn't yet budded, it says. So now it's like the last food. They're like, well, we'll still have bread, Now the locusts come and they eat that. So now human life is like, there's going to be some starvation. Like it's bad. Okay. And you start seeing darkness in 8, 9, and 10 all have a theme. Because what's happening is how did creation start? In darkness with water over the land, which is like how it will end for Egypt. Totally. Darkness and water. Total decreation. Okay? But the reason darkness gets introduced here is because the locusts make the land dark, it says. So darkness is starting to come. The big darkness. Then pre-creation darkness. It's pitch black. You can't see anything. You can't see your hand in front of your face. This was a major Egyptian god, the sun god. So this is a bad deal. And so it's getting to big severity. This one makes Pharaoh like, what can we do? Like this really breaks Pharaoh for a time. And then ultimately it ends with actual everybody affected, human death at midnight, and the dark is carried. Okay? So do you guys see how it moves and grows in severity? So there's both movement and severity with each one. The movement is most pronounced in the beginning ones as it gets to Pharaoh, but it ends up affecting him most deeply with his firstborn son. Okay, then we see some pattern in here with the prime mover, like the person who delivers the plague. We see Aaron's staff is at play. Aaron is the main character in the first 3 ones. Then it's the Lord, and there's Moses and Aaron, but there's no words on number 6, which demonstrates that it's the Lord. And then the last are Moses. And so you see pattern there. Okay. Retributive irony. We've already talked about the Nile filled with bloodshed. The second one This is the goddess Hecht, which is the god of multiplication and fertility. So just like God had the midwives who assist birth, they're like the goddess of fertility. They assist birth. That's the frogs. So picture the midwives as these frogs. So there's retributive irony there. And then there's irony in number 6 because it says, take soot from the kiln. That's probably where they made bricks. Okay? Where he forced them to make bricks. And that's what brings the boils. And then, by now, my name on the earth. So he's replacing Pharaoh's name. And then the firstborn, he starts the whole thing out. And he said, you're killing my firstborn. If you don't stop, I'm going to kill yours. And then he does it. So there's retributive irony there. Okay, Pharaoh's locale, you see an order to this, that on the first, so think of the plagues in triads, in sets of 3. So you have 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and then 10 is its own thing. And you'll find that there's order in the 3. We saw it with Aaron's staff, Aaron's staff, Aaron's staff, the Lord, likely the Lord, Moses heard but no words. Okay, this is what happens with Pharaoh. At the beginning of every set of 3, he's in the water, or seems to be. So go out to him in the morning in the Nile. Then 4, go out to him early in the water. And then 7, it says rise early. And every time he rises early, he goes to the water. So it seems like he's in the water there too. So at the first one of every 3, Pharaoh is met in the water. The second one of every 3, it says go into Pharaoh. So you're like going to meet with him. So that's number 2, number 5, and number 7. Go into Pharaoh. And then the third of every triad, there's absolutely no warning. It just happens. So you see no warning, no warning, no warning. Okay. The gods confronted. People speculate on some of this stuff. Some of it's more sure. I tried to not put the stuff that was less sure. Hapi and Isis, the Hecht I told you about. Set, the god of desert storms. Apis, bulls, very big god. Hathor, Sekhmet, and Nut, the sky, and Re, the sun god. And then Pharaoh's son was considered a deity because it says at the end of the Exodus, I will also judge Pharaoh's gods. Okay? Or I judged his gods. And where do we see Rachel judge Laban's gods, even though she does it imperfectly? Yep, okay. All right. Israel's separation, they appear to be part of the plague here, part of the plague, part of the plague. They're set apart here, they're set apart here. Nothing's said here, but it really stresses Egypt. So I'm thinking they didn't get boils. And then they're set apart here, and there's no word here. So we don't know. The locusts, I'm kind of like wondering if they were affected because they're about to leave town. So why not have all their food eaten? You know? But I don't know. Okay, and then you come down to the magician's ability. They performed it. They couldn't perform it this time, and they say it's the finger of God. They're not even mentioned on these. This one, they couldn't stand before Moses and Pharaoh, so they're ashamed. They're like just totally out of the picture. And then Pharaoh's response. Didn't take it to heart. By the way, all of Pharaoh's hardened heart gets introduced when God says, Pharaoh has a hard heart, and I know it'll be very hard for him to let you go. He says that. And then he says, and I'm going to harden his heart so that he can't let you go until I want him to. So this is Pharaoh's will. He's evil. And this is God's sovereignty. He's sovereign, and he directs kings like water in his hands. But I just appreciate how that's introduced because it leaves us with, okay, he's not just some dummy getting directed by God. He also has a will is presented that he is hard-hearted already. And God tends to judge people by putting their sin into hyperdrive. That has to do with judging a person according to their crime. Okay? So it says he didn't take it to heart. This time he says the Lord's name. Remember he asked what the Lord's name was? Now he's quoting it. It's kind of like Humorous. God is winning. Pharaoh's actually saying the Lord's name, the guy who he said he didn't know who he was. His heart hardened, wouldn't listen. He uses another name for God here. He uses Elohim here, and he requests prayer. But then refuses. Hardened his heart. He admits sin with the hail, requests prayer, but then ceases. After the hail ceases, he hardens. He requests his sin forgiven, requests prayer, says the Lord's name, but then the Lord hardens his heart. And then the Lord hardened his heart, told Moses to get away from him and take care to never see his face again or die. And then he finally says, up, go, and he asks to be blessed as well. Okay? So, why do you think God inserts this structure? What do you think could be the reason he does that? All this structure, all this order. And guys, there's just stuff I couldn't put in here. Like Moses even asks him one time, I think it's with the hail or something. When do you want me to have it stop? And Pharaoh says, tomorrow. Which you're like, that's interesting. Because why is all this order in it? Why did Pharaoh go down to see if the lights were out in Egypt? Or if it was that what it was? If there was light in Egypt? I can't remember. He goes and checks on, the livestock. He goes to check on the livestock to see if theirs died. Why? So I'm getting to it. Why all this order? What might Pharaoh or anybody be tempted to think? And people still do it today. Guys, when I study these, so many commentators try to make this sound like natural events. It's so ridiculous. And some condemn that view, which you should. True. I definitely agree with that. But what about the order of things? Why would he put order in this? Why would Aaron do things, then God, then Moses? Why would it move out of the land and get more severe as it comes? Why does he have him approach Pharaoh in the water, in the water, in the water, in his house, in his house, in his house? No warning, no warning, no warning. Why does he organize it? No. I mean, it's somehow connected to that, but okay, why did Joseph have them go through the brothers in order of birth? See, listen, it would be really easy for Pharaoh or anybody to think, the world's just coming apart. This isn't you. You don't have there's no design behind this. You just happen to catch me at a good time when the whole world's falling apart. But the order tells you this is designed by God. You see what I mean? The order of going from the oldest to the youngest with Joseph would convince all the boys to say, God is doing something right now. Order suggests God. Chaos suggests just nature. Do you see the difference? And so I think the order is here, and you're meant to see it because God wants the world to see that this was a designed event, not just a crazy time in the world. That's the idea. And that's why Israel's not hit with it when everybody else is. Okay, so that's the concept of the plagues. And then you end with complete and total decreation while Israel is experiencing recreation. When the lights are out in Egypt, what's on in Goshen? Lights. When Egypt doesn't have any land animals, what does Goshen have? Land animals. So it's all of this, and then we'll ultimately see it in the Red Sea because Egypt ends in the Red Sea, buried in the water, in the dark. Because they come out at the light of day. So buried in the water, in the dark, and it turns to day. That's just like the old creation. Buried in the water, in the dark. Israel has dry land separated from water, and they're walking into the light. So it's complete decreation in one sense and complete Genesis 1 creation in the second sense. That's what God's up to here. Okay? The whole world's coming apart with everything else. Okay. So they come out of the water. They come out of Egypt. We're not to the water yet. They come out of Egypt, and he has them celebrate Passover as the firstborn son. And what's significant about Passover? You must do something with Passover. What is it? Or you mustn't have something. Passover leads right into the feast of unleavened bread. So what does Israel need to do with Passover? They need to get all the leaven out of their house. Okay? What's the symbolic import of that? Just like circumcision is to cut off the flesh, what is getting out the leaven? What does leaven do? It permeates the loaf, the ball of dough. Okay? So what's God telling them by getting out the leaven? Get out the leaven of Egypt as you go into new life. That's the theological import. That whatever gods they worshiped, they have been dethroned. I'm God on the throne. Don't have any of Egypt's leaven with you. Get it all out. Get it. Leave it there. And you come out unleavened. Now, leaven is not sinful. It's just a symbol. It's a symbol of because guys, here's what we're going to find. It was super. How long did it take to get Israel out of Egypt? I mean, it seemed to happen pretty quick. I think there is a date that somebody worked out, but it seemed to happen pretty quick. They got out of Egypt really fast. How long did it take God to get Egypt out of Israel? 40 years. See, getting them out of Egypt was the easy part. Getting Egypt out of them, that's a different story. A lot of people are going to have to die for that. So, cut off the leaven of Egypt. Don't leave it there. And you come out an unleavened loaf. Come and I'm about to come into my house. Okay? So he's reminding them who they are. Paul will say, clean, and guys, just so you know, they don't clean out the leaven to become clean. They have been cleaned. Paul will say, clean out the leaven, for you are in fact unleavened. So it's not that you clean out the leaven to become unleavened. No, and that's in it. Clean out the sin in your life because you are righteous. That's very different, isn't it? It's not get the sin out of your life so that you can be righteous. That's works righteousness. That's not how God talks. He says, Dagi, you are righteous. So anything that's wrong in you, get rid of it. That's the old stuff. Welcome to the new. You know? And so this is the beauty of how God talks to his people. And by the way, he's saying that in the letter of 1 Corinthians. Count the things that the Corinthians are doing wrong and you'll run out of fingers. They're a messed up church. But Paul says to them, hey, you're righteous. Get rid of the unrighteousness. You are righteous. That's the beauty of the gospel. It calls us what we're not so that we can become what we are in Christ. And so this is what he's doing with Passover. They don't clean out the leaven to become unleavened. They clean out the leaven because they are unleavened. They've been saved. They've been covered with the blood of the Lamb. And so it's at this point where we see that God saw and heard in Exodus 2, but now he's with them. He's going to come out with them from Egypt and lead them. Exodus 13:18. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. So he's leading them now. And then he'll ultimately be with them in Exodus 40 when he comes to live in his house. Okay, so what does he do? He takes them out of Egypt and he brings them to the Red Sea. Are they happy about that or sad by that? Because guys, there was a way around the Red Sea. There's also a way that he could bring them right into the Promised Land, but he didn't do that. Why? You remember? Okay. What does that remind us of something Jesus said to the disciples? I have, but you're not able to handle it right now. Do you see how Jesus is just like his Father? That God knew Israel couldn't handle it going right into where the Philistines were, and I think that's the people group. You just can't handle it. So I'm going to take you around a different way because you're too weak. And Jesus does the same thing with the disciples. And he's probably doing the same thing with us right now. He's keeping things from us that will happen in our lives because we're not fit yet to handle it. So he takes them to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh is going to come and get them. Why? Because he's all about a deeper deliverance. This Exodus was not about a physical liberation alone. That's part of it. That's meant really to illustrate what he's really about. And what's he really about? Internal liberation. They need to be freed from inside themselves. Sin is a much bigger captor than Pharaoh. And so he brings them to the Red Sea. They're so happy, but they're in big trouble as far as they see it. Because God is getting them to... There's a story I've heard about a family that adopted a child that was living on the streets and, just looking for food where he could find it. And they bring him into their home. And at the first meal, that child takes a piece of bread from the table, first thing he does, and just kind of holds it and keeps eating. And he's holding that bread, keeps eating. Meal's over. He gets up from the table with that piece of bread and goes to the next thing. Keeps the piece of bread. He takes it to the bathroom with him before bed. He keeps it through his getting a bathtub. He goes into bed, still got that wet piece of bread, still holding it. He goes to the next meal. And he does this with every meal. He takes something from the table. Why is he doing that? Because he's not certain about tomorrow. That's exactly right. That's the way he's lived his whole life. When I find food, eat till I'm filled, but keep something left because I don't know if I'm going to find it again. And the parents said it was a huge victory when that boy ate a meal and left with no food. Why was that a big victory? He trusted them that they will keep feeding him. Okay? And guys, this is the thing that God's trying to teach Israel. Like, you can let go of the bread. I will keep you. I will guard you. You don't need to freak out with every new fear. Just rest. Live in day 7. Lean into me. But they see Pharaoh coming, and is that what they do? They say, oh, this is going to be cool. How is God going to deliver us now? Is that what they say? No. They totally panic. Okay? And then they dance, and commentators are frequent to say, they dance when they get out of the Red Sea, but they really danced on the wrong side of the sea. Because they should have been dancing before, trusting God to deliver them out of that situation. It's where he led them. He led them to the sea. He could have led them around, but he didn't. And so this is significant. And it's because he wants to bring about a deeper deliverance. All right, Exodus 15. So they are on the other side of the sea now, and what do? Just kind of keep flipping your pages with me, because that's kind of how we'll go through. What do they do in Exodus 15? They worship. But how do they worship? Singing, okay. Is there any order to it, or is there anything specific? Is there any details that we should unearth? Okay, what are they? Okay, and look at verse 17. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain. So he's reestablishing Eden again, right? And the mountain is the mountain sanctuary. It's his abode, okay? But yeah, very good, Isaiah. And I just heard recently that this seems to be a chiasm. I still have to chase that out, but an DCBA. But the center of the chiasm, according to, it's Jim Hamilton was the one teaching this. The center of the chiasm is Exodus 15:11. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. So you can see that the Exodus has all been about God's name. And where does the chiasm lead to talking about? Who is God? So it's really profound when you put that with how Exodus opens. His name has been identified. Very good. Okay, now Isaiah, you went deep on me, which I love. I'm glad you pushed us there. But I was talking very simple. Anything simple you notice about this? Oh, it's actually not as easy as I'm making it sound. Because in our translations it's bad. All right. Then Moses, and in verse 1, what do your translations say? Okay. So that is the sons of Israel. Moses and the sons of Israel. So just cross out people and write sons. Okay, they kind of like domesticated it for us. But in the Hebrew, it's Moses and the sons of Israel. And then look at verse 20. And what does it say? Then, yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
Then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, horse and his rider, he had thrown into the sea.
Okay. So, who starts out singing? And who finishes singing? Okay. Does that sound like the order of anything else we've seen so far in the Bible? This is a new creation, guys. You've got Adam in the men, and you've got women. You got Eve in the women. Okay? All right. Now, guys, you will make my heart so happy if you get this right. Okay? All right. I might just let you go to lunch if you get this right. Otherwise, we're skipping lunch. We're going right through. Okay. Take a step back. Look at your Bibles from out here. And look at just the heading. You don't have to look at the verse. Just look at the headings. These are obviously not from the Bible, the headings. And sometimes they get it really wrong. But this time, they're really good. So, okay, step back. And look at the next two headings in your Bibles. And you tell me what that makes you think of. In chapter 15, and then as chapter 16 starts. Okay? I can't get mad at you for thinking of Christ. Everything has to do with Christ. But no, that's not what I'm talking about. Well, but it's not wine, it's water. Sweet water. Oh, made to sweet? Okay, I'm with you. Okay. Day 2 and day 3. Okay, interesting. Anybody else? Okay, I'll give you a hint. I think the best hint I can give you is bitter water. Yes. He tests them with bitter water and bread. I could be wrong, but I'm looking at this, and this is his vindicated bride. This is his bride to be. And he tests them at the very outset with water, bitter water, and bread. And they fail both tests. And I think that's predictive of what you can expect out of Israel. Now, he still encourages them. They fail with the water. He turns the water sweet. He brings them to 70 palm trees and 12 springs, 70 elders, 70 people of Jacob, and 12 tribes, 12 elders. So this is like, look, I'm making you Eden if you'll have it. But I'm testing you right now with bitter water and bread, and you're failing both. So I think looming in the background that this is another build-up getting you ready for the test of adultery. That you've got Genesis 3, you've got Genesis 15 and 16, and then you've got Exodus 32 that are all building the way with this bitter water and bread. And as manna, they get sick of the manna. And so it's like not the bread they want type thing. So anyway, that's just a thought, but I think it's looming in the background there. But then he greatly encourages them and cares for them even through their failure with the springs and the palm trees. Okay, so then into Exodus 16, we've got great encouragement with the manna. He tells them not to gather on the Sabbath, that he'll give them enough on day 6 so that they don't have to gather on the rest day. Okay, does that sound like anything else in Israel's future history? Just replace days with years? What's that? The giving the Sabbath year to the ground. Yeah, and to yourselves. So on the 6th year, he'll give you enough food so that you'll have enough for the 6th, the 7th, and even the 8th until the harvest comes. Okay? Now, guys, do you know how many years did Israel spend in Babylon? 70 years. How do we get that number? How did God always has a reason why he chooses something. Why did he choose 70 years in Babylon? Very good. Very good, Shaq. 2 Chronicles 36 gives you this answer. Verse 20 of 2 Chronicles 36. By the way, I was talking with Samuel the other day that the way the Bible, the Old Testament should be divided is 2 Chronicles 36 should probably be the last book of the Old Testament before you get to Matthew. But anyway, 2 Chronicles 36:20. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So, did Israel, just like they didn't keep Sabbath with the manna and some went out to look for manna on the Sabbath, so they wouldn't give their land Sabbath rests because they couldn't let go of that bread that I was talking about. Remember with that child? Okay, so check this out. If the land needed to enjoy a Sabbath rest for 70 years, what does that mean about Israel's unfaithfulness? They were unfaithful for 490 years. So it's not just they're unfaithful for 70 years. No. For 490 years, they raped the land because they didn't trust God. And so God gives his land his Sabbath rest. And so now, if you look at Israel's timeline, you'll find that Israel did keep the sabbatical year sometimes. They did do it, given how long they were in Israel. But this is a sad, just a sad word on Israel's future history. Now, this manna in Exodus 16, this manna is white and it tastes like honey. Okay? It's white and it tastes like honey. Does that remind you of anything? Take a step back. Is there anything else that's white that has to do with Israel's situation? Where are they headed? To the promised land. What do we think about the promised land? How do you, what's that?
The land that flows.
Yes, with honey and milk. Yeah. So the manna is a little foretaste of the glory to come. It flows with milk and honey. I'm going to give you guys a little thing that tastes like milk and honey. Right? To get your appetites ready. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And that's essentially, to a degree, what we have with bread and wine of the marriage supper of the Lamb. Okay? And so it's a little taste. It's a little encouragement. And we will break here.